now available in paperback and e-readers. Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller. Historical Men in Crisis. One of my viewers wanted me to talk about the tragic story of Robert Yummy Sandifer. Now, I felt that this story fit better into the Historical Men in Crisis series because the tragic story of Robert Yummy Sandifer is one that shows us what happens when one generation of beta males winds up creating another generation of beta males with feminist indoctrinated women, and the result you get is another beta male who winds up on the road to becoming the second generation of boys who grow up to become men in crisis. Now, Robert Sandifer was known as Yummy on the streets of Chicago because of his love for cookies, but sadly, Robert Sandifer never got any sort of love ever since the day he was conceived. Now, Robert Sandifer was born in Chicago on April 17, 1983, to Lorena Sandifer, a woman who had over 30 arrests for prostitution and drug-related charges, and his father, Robert Atkins, was never in his life because he had been incarcerated due to a felony gun charge. And as the result of him being born to a drug-addicted prostitute, Robert Sandifer was on the road to becoming a boy in crisis due to the abuse that he suffered at the hands of a neglectful female authority figure who took out all of her anger at men on her son by going out here and beating him ever since he was an infant, and also going out here and burning him with cigarettes. Now, this feminist indoctrinated woman, Lorena Sandifer, basically had a lot of daddy issues, and again, because she had anger at all of the male figures in her life for, as she believed, failing her, such as her father for possibly abandoning her, and the boyfriend basically winding up in prison, she was angry because there was no man to go out here and lead her as a woman, and took out all of her anger at men on her son. And as she took out all of her anger at men on her son, things were so bad that the Department of Children and Family Services in Chicago had to take Robert away from his mother and wound up taking him to his grandmother in the Rosalind neighborhood of Chicago. And that was a really stupid decision, but because the Department of Family Services is gynocentric and can't connect dots, they couldn't see how they were actually making life worse for Robert Sandifer, because where did Lorena learn all of her dysfunction? She learned it in the home of the grandmother. That's what many of these family services people just couldn't connect the dots on. They couldn't understand that the grandmother was the one who taught her whole dysfunctional lifestyle to the mother, Lorena Sandifer, and by giving Robert to the grandmother, all they were doing was going out here and taking the boy out of one dysfunctional codependent environment into another dysfunctional codependent environment. And because Robert Sandifer was being transferred from one dysfunctional environment to another, what happened to Robert Sandifer was he got lost in the shuffle of the over 19 children who were in his grandmother's home. And instead of this boy getting the love from his grandmother, he got neglected and ignored. And as he got neglected and ignored, this boy went from being a boy who was really in a troubling situation to a boy who wound up in the presence of other beta males who put him on the road to being a boy in crisis. Now, Robert Sandifer, due to the neglect of his mother, wound up running into the Black Disciples gang, and this gang basically wound up taking Robert Sandifer under their wing, and that sadly led to this boy winding up in the presence of other beta males who could not really give him the leadership and guidance that a boy gets in a collective of men. Now, in my book, The Man Crisis, I have a chapter talking about gangs and the man crisis, and gangs form in communities where there are no fathers to go out here and assert authority as a collective of men. Now, when you have a community and you have men in that community who have jobs and have businesses, they have an investment in that community that they've built. And because they have an investment in that community that they've built, what these men do as a collective is establish standards for that community. And because those men establish standards in that community to protect the wealth building assets that they have established, what happens is those boys in that community have a structure established by that man, and that structure made by that collective of men gives those boys a scaffold to work with and a scaffold to go out here and climb as they're building on the base established by their fathers. Moreover, when you have a collective of men in a community, what happens is because those men have invested resources in that community, they have economic power to assert authority over everything in that community, and they have the resources to enforce their authority by establishing order that is enforced not just by law enforcement, by the police, but also by their own authority, because these men control the resources in that community, and because those men control the resources in that community, they can establish order and set boundaries and set standards and written and unwritten social rules for how business is conducted in that community. Now, this contrasts what a gang is all about, because a gang is run by, again, beta males who submit to the authority of female authority figures. And because these males submit to the authority of female authority figures, they cannot go out here and establish any sort of structure because they don't own anything in that community. Moreover, they cannot establish any sort of authority because these males submit to the authority of the women, who are subjugated themselves by the welfare state, and because these males basically get their economic and political and social needs met by women, these males have no actual power whatsoever to create any sort of order in the community. So when you have these males, they have absolutely no purpose or direction, and when they come together as a group, they do not form an organization that can do anything in the community. No, what they do is become a loose-knit, disorganized group of individuals known as a gang. And again, a gang is a group of individuals who really have no real economic or political power, but because these males have the physical power, they can make it look like they are somebody so-called controlling the so-called turf, but these men basically don't control anything. And what they do is, because they don't really have a purpose or a direction, these disorganized individuals go out here and look to try to intimidate others into believing they actually have power, but in actuality, they have no power whatsoever outside of the physical violence they can assert to try to intimidate anybody who usually is black, because outside of black people or Latino people, depending on the community, these guys have absolutely no power and are usually quickly cowed by the system of white supremacy or white or non-black police officers. So many of these guys, they have, again, no real power, and they go out here and try to make it look like they have power over those who don't know any better. And these guys, basically, they're thinking that these guys have power. And again, when it comes to a little boy like Robert Yummy Sandifer, who didn't really know anything about the whole foundations of manhood, because his mother didn't teach him about the role of man in the Bible, and his grandmother never taught him about the role of man in the Bible. He saw these gangsters as people that he thought had power. And because he thought that these gang members had power and authority, he thought that these would be role models for him as a man. And he thought because these males basically were out here looking to look out for him, this is why he decided to go out here and quit attending elementary school and began roaming the streets doing jobs for the gang by stealing cars and breaking into houses, and had been arrested at 10 years old on charges of armed robbery. And what was being done by the Black Disciples is they were using this 8-year-old boy as a juvenile who could go out here and commit crimes for them. And they do this because the court system wouldn't prosecute him as an adult. No, they would see him as a juvenile, and they would be able to get away with him doing crimes for them. But he couldn't see how these males did not care about him. No, they didn't care about him. They just saw him as a tool to go out here and use to commit the crimes they wanted committed, and they could go out here and get away with them because he was a minor according to their legal system. Now, Robert Sandifer, at 10 years old, was arrested on charges of armed robbery, and he was taken in for psychological counseling, and a psychological examiner said that Robert is a child growing up without any encouragement or support and has a sense of failure that has infiltrated his every aspect of his inner self. And I'm going to have to disagree with that. He did have encouragement and support, but he had encouragement and support from beta males in that gang, and because he saw those beta males in that gang as his male role models, this encouraged him to commit crimes and made him think that the only way for him to survive was to go out here and commit crimes, because he was not taught proper male life skills or proper male survival skills. And because he was not taught proper male life skills or male survival skills, this male basically wound up becoming on the road to becoming a boy in crisis. And this boy in crisis, again, he had no real figures to show him a model of manhood, and that's why he was on the road to becoming a boy who was on the road to becoming a man in crisis. Now, after this arrest, Robert Sandifer and his siblings were removed from his grandmother's home and sent to the Lawrence Hall DCFS Chicago on Chicago's north side, and Robert Sandifer ran away from that shelter and never returned. Now, the entire DCFS system never could find him, and I don't believe that DCFS in Chicago ever wanted to find him, because he was a black boy, and a black boy's life really didn't matter to these white leftists who passively wanted to go out here and make it look like they really cared about Robert Sandifer, but really didn't care about him at all. And when he fell through the cracks of their system, it really didn't matter to them at that point, because he was just another black boy who was just another statistic in their system. And sadly, because Robert Sandifer was just another black boy in the white supremacist system, what happened was he went back on the streets of Chicago, and as he went back on the streets of Chicago, he went back to the only male figures in his community who he thought had power, the Black Disciples. And as he went back to the Black Disciples, they basically weaponized this 10-year-old boy to go out here and do their dirty work, and used him again to do that dirty work, because what they wanted to do was be able to get away with crimes by using the hands of a minor to do their dirty work. So what they did was say they wanted him to do a favor by going out here and opening fire with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol on several of their enemies, and this wound up injuring several youths And sadly, among the youths who wound up injured was 14-year-old Siobhan Dean, who was shot and killed with a stray bullet. Now, after Siobhan Dean was murdered by Robert Sandifer, what happened was the gang basically took this boy and ran and hid him, and they wound up going out here hiding him by going out here and saying that they were looking out for him. And while they were standing on the porch of a home, Robert Sandifer was asking to call his grandmother, and that's where he was met by the Craig brothers, Craig and Derek Hardaway. And as he was met by these two gang members who were both 16 and 14, they told him he was being taken to a safe location out of town and ordered into a waiting car, but instead he was taken to a railroad underpass, told to get on his knees, and then shot in the back of the head. And after he was shot in the back of the head, that's where his body was found, and people were so disturbed by this entire incident that over 400 people went to his funeral. But I have to wonder if any of those people intervened. Maybe this boy's life would have been saved early on. But this whole situation incensed so many people regarding the gang violence that people basically were enraged by seeing what they saw, and went out here and looked to try to do something about these gangs in Chicago for a moment. But the way they could have actually done something about these gangs was they could have gone out here and invested in the men of those communities, and that's something they could have done that could have presented Robert Yummy Sandifer from winding up on the road to becoming a boy in crisis involved with those gangs, because the way you deal with gangs is not just with law enforcement. You need to have a collective of men in those communities running that community, and that's how you keep gangs from forming in your communities, because when you have collectives of men running the businesses and controlling the economy in that community, what that does is make it where the gang cannot form, because the men who build and invest in that community are not going to allow any subversives to come in and undermine their authority and their order. So the reason why you don't see gangs in many suburban white neighborhoods is because those suburban white neighborhoods are controlled by business interests, and because those business interests control the economy, they control the politics of that community. Moreover, these men assert authority over their sons and establish a standard of living for everybody in that community, and this is how gangs are stopped. Gangs are not stopped by social programs. No, they are stopped by collectives of men, and it's collectives of men that stop gangs from forming and keeping tragedies like that happen to Robert Yummy Sandifer and Siobhan Dean from happening. It is the men in the community who protect the community. It is men in the community who keep gangs from forming and keep these subversives out of their communities, or pushed so far to the back that they have no real control. This is how you stop a gang in a community, but our government doesn't want that to happen because they don't want to see black people compete in their economy, and they would rather see kids like Robert Yummy Sandifer fall through the cracks, because they want to see black people winding up dead and forgotten. What they want to do is, again, eliminate black people. But the whole story of Robert Yummy Sandifer, again, is a sad story, and it's a sad story that shows how a boy can wind up on the road to becoming a man in crisis when there are no fathers in the community to assert authority and establish order. When there are no fathers in the community, what happens is one generation of women goes out here and raises another generation of women who go out here and breed a second generation of beta males, and those beta males, because they have no real male models to show them manhood, or no males to establish any sort of order under God's order, what they do is go out here and associate with other beta males, and as they associate with other beta males, what happens is These boys winding up learning a whole dysfunctional paradigm as related to manhood, and as they learn the dysfunctional paradigm of manhood, where they learn to be codependent and submit to female authority figures, and they also go out here and learn things about manhood that come from a woman's perspective, where they learn how to have emotions like a woman, but the physical strength of a man. They look tough on the outside and intimidating to other black people, but whenever these same individuals go out here and get in the face of a white person, they start buck dancing and bojangling and becoming submissive, because these males basically are looking to submit to the authority of white supremacy, and these guys basically are irregular forces of white supremacy. They are doing the dirty work of the white supremacist, again, because the white supremacist doesn't want to get their hands dirty by going out here and participating in lynching black people and destroying black towns like Black Wall Street. What they do is go out here and program these gang members to come into black communities and have them do the lynching for them, to have them doing the murders of black people, so that they won't go out here and look to aspire to be better. No, what they do is use these gangs as chocolate Klansmen. This is something I'm getting from Captain Black. And this is what they do, is use these chocolate Klansmen to go out here and take the lives of any black person who dares to go against the white supremacist narratives as related to black people, and keep black people on a plantation known as the ghetto. And these overseers basically, again, go out here and keep the black community oppressed, keep the black community where the slaves remain in the plantation, and keep people in fear, because these individuals are spellbound. And because these individuals are spellbound and want to fit in the black box that's acceptable to white people, what they will do is play the role of the thug and the gangster, not understanding these are social constructs made up by white supremacists, which are repackagings of the black brute narrative and the minstrel narrative of the antebellum South, not understanding that the white supremacist basically is putting them on a road to destruction. And sadly, with Robert Yummy Sandifer, he wound up on this road to dysfunction. And as he wound up on this road to dysfunction, these gang members, who were basically spellbound and brainwashed, used him as a tool to do their dirty work, then discarded him like trash, taking his life, and his life had no value to them. And sadly, his life was taken by boys who weren't that much older than he was, Craig and Derek Hardaway, who were both, again, 16 and 14 years old, who didn't even know much about manhood themselves, because, like Robert Sandifer, they were basically intergenerational boys on the road to becoming men in crisis. And what happened to those boys, Derek and Craig, is that they both got convicted of murder, and they both got 45-year and 60-year sentences, but they were released in 2016 and 2020. And again, troubling, because these boys, who basically grew up with no father and no men in the community, they, after taking the life of this boy, are back in their community as men in crisis. And again, this whole situation with Robert Yummy Sandifer shows us what happens when, again, there are no fathers in a community as a collective, because you need fathers in a community as a collective to go out here and establish, again, order and authority, go out here and have businesses and structured activities for these boys to learn how to socialize. They need a father there to give them structure. Unfortunately, when a boy doesn't have structure, he's on the road to becoming a man in crisis. And in the case of Robert Sandifer, what's really sad is he never grew up to become a man. No, he was a boy who was in crisis from day one. Now, if you want to learn about what leads to boys becoming on the road to becoming men in crisis, and the dysfunctional life paradigm that leads to their on the road to self-destruction, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you want to learn more about the spellbound mindset that undermines black people as related to living in the world, you can pick up my novel Spellbound in paperback and Kindle format at Amazon.com, and you can also find it at other online booksellers like Barnes & Noble, Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you'd like to see me do more videos in the historical Men in Crisis series, or you want to request a video like this viewer did, you can send a donation to the Cash App or the PayPal, and if I know something about that subject, I will make that video for you. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.